I'm glad to have you join us on the program from the National Assembly. I am Ignatius Nkwo. Well, on Wednesdays, the Nigerian Television Authority brings to you live broadcasts of Senate plenary. But today, the Senate will not be sitting. And because of that, we'll bring to you a package on an interactive session by the Senate Joint Committee on Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, led by its Committee on Finance.
Of welcoming and addressing this important gathering of top government functionaries at the helms of affairs of various ministries, departments and agencies, MDAs, of the federal government. This interactive session is pursuant of the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federation, for the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to consider and approve the 2022-2024 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTEF, and Fiscal Strategy Paper. During the Senate sitting on July 12, 2021, the request was referred to the joint committees of the Senate on Finance, National Planning and Economic Affairs, Foreign and Local Debt, Banking, Insurance, and other financial institutions, Petroleum Resources upstream, downstream petroleum sector, and gas for additional legislative action. Since the inception of the 9th Senate in 2019, the Senate had considered and approved 3 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy papers, which set the fundamentals for the implementation of 2 appropriation acts and a supplementary appropriation act that was recently passed. In spite of the unprecedented negative economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic that is still ongoing, the target of returning our budget cycle to January to December was achieved and is being sustained. Budget implementation has improved tremendously, and the nation has been able to pull through a recession. Let me place it on record at this point that the Senate Committee on Finance started an investigative hearing on 9th March 2021 on the remittances of all revenue-generating agencies of government to the Consolidated Revenue account for the Federation, as well as payment of the 1% stamp duty on all contracts executed in all MDAs. The investigation, which is still ongoing, is targeted at the goal of boosting revenues of the government in face of dwindling resources from traditional revenue source of crude oil. It is also premised by the need to reduce government yearly budget deficits, resulting in massive borrowing from local and international sources. It is apparent that the borrowing trends cannot be allowed to continue unchecked, and conscious efforts must be made to reduce budget deficits. Achieving these goals requires us to look inward towards revenue generation by the MDAs. Our preliminary findings and directives to some of the agencies had led to payment of millions of naira into CRF in accordance with the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 and the 1999 Constitution. It is needless to say that these millions now paid to CRF contribute to the yearly budget deficits of the federal government. The investigation was also able to get some agencies to accept opting out of the federal budget altogether based on their internal revenue generating ability. Some of these findings will further guide the proceedings of this 3-day interactive session. From the challenges facing our nation in the post-COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown era, it is time for all to agree that it cannot be business as usual for government revenue and expenditures. We need to block all revenue leakages and misuse in MDAs, as well as control expenditure therein to free funds for needed infrastructure development and provision of social services. On behalf of my colleagues in the Joint Committee, I welcome you all to this urgent and important meeting.
I am pleased to be with you as we prepare for the 2022-2024 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTEF, and the Fiscal Strategy Paper, FSP, against the background of the imminent 2022 budget. This preparation complies with the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007 and the new timeless that we have deployed towards governance. That is, at ensuring that the budget of the government return to a calendar of January to December of every fiscal year. While we appreciate the importance of policies and regulation, we also understand that policies have to come at the appropriate time for us to reap the maximum benefits. This thinking has guided our strategy and has yielded results reflected in the change in our budget cycle. The passing of the landmark bill, like the Petroleum Industry Bill and the Electoral Bill, and will continue to guide us in times ahead. The interactive session we are having today is by the Committee on Finance, Local and Foreign Debt, Banking, Insurance, and other financial institutions, petroleum resources upstream, downstream petroleum sector, and gas, following the Senate referral of the document to them on the 13th of July, 2021. I am not just happy with the collaboration of our committee, but also the involvement of other stakeholders in what is additionally consistent with the Senate operational procedure. Because of this, we expect the interactive session to be rigorous and for issues on the 2022 to 2024 medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal strategy paper to be argued with essential fact given its role in the upcoming financial year. Our focus will include volatile oil revenue, earning from other sources, our spending plan, the government development priorities, and estimated time of implementation. We have passed the route many times before, which is why I am confident that our expertise and experience shall suffice in helping us arrive at a salutary conclusion. Your zeal is commendable, and I urge you not to rest on your house in your effort consistent with the resolve to the Ninth Senate and the need to meet the yearnings and the aspirations of our people. On this note, it is now my pleasure to declare this interactive session open.
In the course of our interactive session with the various revenue-generating agencies some time ago, we discovered that there are so many leakages, revenue leakages. I want to urge all of us to work on these leakages. Because at the end of the day, as I've been pointed out several times by several people concerned Nigerians, we need these revenues. We need these revenues to minimize our level of borrowing. Okay? Secondly, and very importantly, you also need to embark on various cost control measures. Quite okay, we know that some of the cost elements are fixed. Okay, but you need to work seriously on your variable cost. And even on the long run, the fixed costs, you can work on them. Because as is always said in economics, on the long run, all costs are variable. You can work on your cost component, on your fixed cost components. So we implore you to, as much as possible, put in all forms of measures to address your cost control. We need that to also step up on our income, on our revenue.
The Nigerian economy faced serious challenges in 2020 with the macroeconomic environment significantly disrupted by COVID-19 pandemic. Crude oil prices declined in the world market, with Bonny Light crude oil price dropping from a peak $72.2 per barrel on January 7, 2020 to below $20 per barrel in April 2020. Crude oil prices are, however, back to the pre-lockdown levels at about $70 per barrel. The Nigerian economy lapsed into recession in Q3 2020 after 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth, but promptly emerged from the recession with a positive 0.11% GDP growth in Q4 2020. The economy sustained the recovery with a Q1 year-on-year GDP growth of 0.51% and a Q2 of 5.01% to consolidate the exit from recession in Q4 2020 which has been helped by the easing of COVID-19 induced restrictions on economic activities. The growth was mainly driven by the non-oil sector, which rose by 0.79% year-on-year, masking the deterioration in the oil GDP, which was by minus 12.65% year-on-year. The growth in non-oil GDP was primarily driven by telecommunication and transportation sectors, which recorded 78.19% and 76.8% year-on-year growth respectively. Other non-oil performance include trade, 22.5% year-on-year, water supply and waste management, 18.5%, ICT 5.5%, and human and health services 4.9% year-on-year growth rate. The persistent rise of inflation halted in April 2021 after 19 consecutive months. From a 4-year high of 18.17% in March 2021, the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, moderated for the 3rd consecutive month to 17.38% in July 2021, with the downward trend expected to continue in August. High unemployment, underemployment rates have implications for poverty incidence in the population. The NBS latest estimates are unemployment at 33% and 40.1% of the population, which is 82.9 million people in extreme poverty. The IMF recently revised its forecast for global economic growth in 2021 to 6.0%, after 3.5% decline in 2020. Global economic growth is projected to moderate to 4.9% in 2022. The projection reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies, the anticipated vaccine-powered recovery in the second half of 2021, and continued adaptation of economic activity to subdued mobility and contactless operations. Nigeria continues to be exposed to risk aversion in the global markets, which will put further pressure on the foreign exchange market as foreign portfolio investors are yet to return to the Nigerian market. The situation is compounded by sustained perceptions about overvaluation of the Naira despite recent adjustments by the Central Bank of Nigeria. In response to the developments affecting the supply of foreign exchange to the economy, the CBN adjusted the official exchange rate to align with NAFEX rate, currently 410.15 Naira to US dollar, thus moving closer to a unified exchange rate regime. On the Federation revenue performance, the overview, these figures are from January to June, that's half year. The gross oil and gas revenue for 2021 was projected at 5.19 trillion. As of June, 1.85 trillion was realized out of the prorated sum of 2.59 trillion. This represents 71.3% performance. Oil and gas deductions were 320.15 billion, or 62.9% more than the budget. This is mainly attributable to petroleum subsidy costs, which was not provided for in the 2021 budget. After netting out deductions, including 13% derivation, net oil and gas revenue inflows into the Federation account amounted to 1,020.45 billion. This is 1.063 trillion, or 51% less than the projection as of June. What you have in the next page is just the breakdown of these numbers that I've just spoken to. And for the Federation and vote pool accounts, which are distributable, the amount available for distribution from the Federation account was 2.41 trillion. Of this amount, the federal government received 1.268 trillion, while the states and local government received 643.41 billion and 496.04 billion, respectively, from the main pool account. Federal, state, and local governments received 138.21 billion, 460.71 billion, and 322.50 billion, respectively, from the VAT pool account. For the budget, 2021 budget implementation update, revenue performance is from January going to June. As of June 2021, the federal government's retained revenue was 2.23 trillion. This is 67.3% of pro rata target. The federal government share of oil revenues was 492.44 billion, which represents 49% performance, while non-oil tax revenues totaled 778.18 billion, which is 104.5% of pro rata. Companies' income tax and value-added tax collections were ahead of the budget targets with 397.02 billion and 129 billion, representing 116.5% and 108.2% respectively of the pro rata targets for the period. Customs collection was 234.02 billion, as 92.1% of target. Other revenues amounted to 922.09 billion, of which independent revenues was 558.13 billion. Again, the next page just shows those breakdown. In terms of expenditure performance, on the expenditure side, 5.81 trillion, representing 92.4% of the prorated budget, has been spent. This excludes government-owned enterprises and project-tied debt expenditure. Of the expenditure, 2.02 trillion was for debt service, as 35% of FGN expenditure, and 1.795 trillion for personnel costs, including pensions. That is 30.9% of federal government revenues. As at August, 1.3 trillion, that's 84.7%, had been released for capital. You will recall that we did submit a supplementary budget, and the approved supplementary budget summary is this: revenue, as for the 2021 supplementary budget, 135 billion. Special funds account receipts was 135. Expenditure was 982.73. And this is broken down between the recurrent non-debt of 123.33 and then the capital of 859.40. This being financed by 847.73 billion made up of debt financing of 802.10 billion, and then aids, grants, and restructured loans of 45.63 billion. The 2021 supplementary budget was passed on the 7th of July, 2021. Mr. President ascended to the enacted supplementary budget on the 26th of July, 2021. Supplementary budget was to address exigent issues in security and health sectors, and implementation has commenced. For the 2022 to 2024 key assumptions and the macroeconomic framework, the key parameters as well as other macroeconomic projections driving the medium-term revenue and expenditure framework have been revised in line with the emergent realities. The new figures are as presented, which is for oil benchmark, 2028 was $28. Actual 2028 was 43. For the 2021 budget was $40 per barrel. And then the revised 2021 forecast is still at $40. But for 2022, we're projecting oil bench price of $57 per barrel. Same for 2023, and in 2024, $55 per barrel. In terms of oil production, 2020 budget had 1.8 million barrels per day production, but the actual was 1.79 million barrels per day. The 2021 budget is based on 1.86 million barrels per day. It's still forecasted to remain at 1.86 million barrels per day. But for 2022, there is a projection of 1.88 million barrels per day. 2023, 2.23 million barrels per day. And in 2024, 2.22 million barrels per day. For the exchange rate, you will see that for 2021 revised forecast, we have 410.15. We have kept this constant across the 2022, 2023, and 2024, because like you know, this is very, very dynamic. For inflation, we project that it will continue to trend down. 2021 revised forecast is 15%, 2022 13, 2023 11, and 2024 10%. For the nominal consumption, we see an increase in 2022 to 149.349.40 trillion, and then on our upward trajectory for 2023 and 2024 up to 179.638.41. The justification for the oil price and production assumptions. The realities of 2021 portend sustained OPEC supply cuts, ongoing vaccination, and rebounding global GDP led by emerging economies. So in consultation with NNPC and other stakeholders, our base oil price scenario in the medium term is $57 per barrel for 2022, same for 2023, and then $55 per barrel for 2024. And this is premised on the averages of leading forecasting institutions, factors affecting market fundamentals, global economic recovery, plans by governments, and market sentiment. Although Nigeria's total production capacity is 2.5 million barrels per day currently, Current crude production is about 1.4 barrels per day. This is slightly short of the OPEC plus quota, and an additional 300,000 barrels per day of condensate, totaling about 1.7 million barrels per day. The Energy Information Administration expects that global oil production will increase to match rising levels of global oil consumption. World Bank forecasts that crude oil prices will rise gradually from an average of US $60 per barrel in 2022 to $61 per barrel in 2023 and $61.9 dollar per barrel in 2024. The draft 2022 to 2024 MTEF FSP has been prepared against the backdrop of global economic recovery amidst improved vaccination outlook and lower incidence of infection, despite recent surge in the Delta variant. However, the medium-term fiscal framework shows that there are continuing global challenges in the aftermath of COVID-19. Overall, fiscal risks are somewhat elevated for Nigeria due to persistent weaknesses in the economy and slower than expected recovery, which threatens our ambitious revenue growth targets as seen in the 2021 performance up to June. Non-oil revenue performance has been impressive and heading in the right direction. Efforts will be sustained in this regard. High costs, including PMS under recovery and cost of securing oil pipelines, are however weighing down on oil revenues. These issues must be addressed wholesomely to free up much needed fiscal space. The Petroleum Industry Act is expected to address most of this.
I would like to just put it on record that everything the Honourable Minister of State for Budget and National Planning has said is aligned with what our understanding with the Ministry of Finance in respect of all the assumptions for the 2022 fiscal year budget and also for the 2022 to 2024. All the advisory around pricing and revenue from the oil and gas, including engagement with my colleague and brother, Engineer Awol of DPR and the Department and FRS are all aligned, and this information speak to themselves. And we may see some differences in the total numbers, but that means that that component of it is the one that we have no visibility to and which we are all aligned with. I just want to put this on record, distinguished senators. Then coming to the pricing, distinguished senators and chairman. The document that we circulated to all of you on page 3 of it, what we typically do is to look at the historical performance of pricing. As you may be aware, this price oscillates depending on demand and supply balances over time, and very many incidences inform the pricing in the long term. So what we did was to look at the 3 years historical dated Brent price, and that's what you can see. The average gives you $59 to the barrel. And we also took at the 1-year average, which comes to $41 to the barrel for the 1-year average. This is very understandable. Year 2020 is the COVID year, and indeed, at a point in time, oil had sold for below zero. That means typically some jurisdictions actually paid people to take delivery of crude oil from their country. So what we're dealing with in our advisory to the Ministry of Finance is on the basis of averages and the forecast from very many renowned international forecast agencies. And that's why the best of the forecast that we have seen is that $7 in 2022 is very realistic, and this is the number that we can live with. Of course, bearing in mind that when you go through some of the advisory agencies, you will see numbers as high as 61, including the World Bank forecast is for $61 to the barrel, or even 62 in the year 2024. That still remains a forecast, but what is realistic is that when we take the average of all other forecast agencies, we are completely aligned with the forecast that is given by the Ministry of Finance, which we advise them accordingly. It's really based on historical performance, and forecast is always something that can never be certain because nobody saw crude oil prices going down below zero in the year 2020. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, there's this question around around what have we done to take subsidy out of the revenue framework. Mr. Chairman, as you are aware, the 2021 Appropriation Act does not have provision for subsidy or under recovery of, for the cost of PMS that we sell to the market. But the reality today is that we are buying product as high as 256 naira to the liter in our pumps today if we are going to sell it today at the market price. But unfortunately, we are also selling at 162 naira to the liter. This is a policy decision. We are not able to sell that beyond this for very, very clear reason that there are engagements that are going on to ensure that you do not have any disruptions to our social process and the fabric of the security of our country. And therefore, those engagements have not been concluded, distinguished Senator. There's an ongoing process that is engaging organized level, civil society organization, and very many other institutions of government that are involved in this process to arrive at a landing on how and when we can exit the subsidy regime to be very precise. And that is why if you see the 2022 Appropriation Act, there is a provision for subsidy in the year 2022. The reason is that we are not sure we can conclude this process before the end of this year or even early in 2022. That is why that provision is made. And it's a reality that we are facing today. And we can understand this very clearly, Excellency and distinguished senators. Oil pricing is a very, very critical element of national security. And as we all may be aware, during the NSAS events, some of us may be aware that, it has really some linkage with the price of petroleum until the matters were resolved. So it is an engagement that is ongoing, distinguished senators. We do realize that there is need for us to exit this ultimately. The Petroleum Industry Act has made provision for an ultimate exit from this subsidy environment, but that decision has not been made, and there's going to be an implementation process under the PIA, which the National Assembly graciously passed as a bill of the National Assembly. So we're working on it, distinguished senators. I will exit this ultimately, but there's really no time frame on this. Having said this, it is very connected to the issue of how much of oil that we consuming today. We have said it over and over that the current supply level of about 60 million liters today, it is not our national consumption. We know for sure that any time we supply less than 60 million liters of PMS into the market, we will have shortages. But we are also very convinced that that is not our consumption. The data that you see around the consumption that you see today is evacuation from the depots as recorded by the petroleum product pricing, by the PPPRA. So this is the only data that we have. And our experience is that any time we supply goes below that number, you will see shortages in our street. There are very many issues around it. Smuggling may be one of my elder brother, the CG of Custom is here. Smuggling is there, round-tripping, all kinds of sharp practices that happen across the country and in very many of our locations. It's a reality that we are dealing with, but I can also confirm that there's enormous work that is going on to contain this, and so much progress has been made. For instance, at a point in time early this year, there were evacuations from the depots in the excess of 100 million liters. We got concerned. We engaged our brothers in the Customs Service, the Department of State Service, the Department of Petroleum Resources, the EFCC, and all other agencies that have some collateral impact on this to contain this. And I'm happy to say that efforts has paid up. There's a significant reduction in those evacuation numbers that we are seeing. But that's not the end of it, distinguished Senator and Chairman. But as long as there's arbitrage between the prices that you sell and what is obtained elsewhere, you can be very, very sure that it's very difficult to contain this situation. Let me give you an example, distinguished senators. If you are selling at 162 naira to the liter, anyone that buys from you today can actually take it back to Rotterdam where it is purchased, and you will still bring it back and make money out of it. So that means that you have very enormous situation of arbitrage that you are facing. This, of course, many things happen, not beyond government, obviously, yes, but obviously it's a very, very difficult situation to manage. There are numbers, but the reality today is that any time NNPC supplies less than 60 million liters of PMS into this country, you will have shortages. If we do it consistently for 3 weeks, you will see shortages. So that's not our consumption. We know for sure that I'm sure very many of us will confirm this if you ask questions, is that as far as Sudan, that you will see Nigerian PMS in Sudan. And that's the reality that we are dealing with. Yes, will that explain? Yes, absolutely, sir. We're very credible information on this. Yes. Is that something that should happen? No. Would it happen? Absolutely, yes. Because when you sell at 162, and you have countries where the sell cost is around 500 naira to the liter, there's every incentive for you to come and buy from here to those locations. And it's also very understandable, Honorable Chairman. First of all, when you want to import petroleum product, you must raise foreign exchange. Very many of our neighbors, even distant and near, are actually challenged around ability to raise foreign exchange. And this probably, that's one major reason that is informing people resorting to having supply from us. Can we stop it? Yes, it is, because as long as we're able to manage the arbitrage properly, I think one day we'll get out of that situation. But the reality today is what we're dealing with is the fact that there's an extreme arbitrage that is existing that is difficult to contain because of very many challenges, social and otherwise. And of course, to just put it bluntly, is that when you have a delta of 100 naira to the liters, you can practically compromise anything. I think let me just put this bluntly and truly so. And then the question around OPEC quota issues, below quota. Distinguished Chairman, you recall that last year, during the COVID-19, we were forced as a country and the whole global oil and gas community to reduce production because there is no market for it. And that lack of market resulted in some countries selling oil at below the market, below zero. And even in our country here, there's a point in April where we sold our oil at less than $10 to the barrel. And obviously, the market, demand and supply is everything in this market. We decided to join the OPEC resolutions that allow us to cut down the production to a level that we can manage the pricing in the market. We're still within that ban. There are steps that are being taken to come back to normalcy. But one thing also with oil and gas production, when you shut down oils, and oil is here, when you shut down oil, you are not sure they will come back when you decide to bring them back. And that's really what we are facing. Even to get back to the OPEC level, the Department of Petroleum Resources has actually authorized anyone to go ahead and test the ability to come back to pre-COVID situation. But that that takes time. It's a gradual process. Of course, that's also complicated by the realities around the safety and security of our assets. There's a huge problem around vandal action, stealing of crude oil along our pipeline, and many, many losses that we suffer. This accumulate to make it very difficult for us to go back to pre-COVID level. Chairman, I can inform you that during the COVID situation, without doing anything, without putting any extra effort, our production rose from around 1.8 million barrels to 2.49 million barrels per day in one day, but precisely on the 17th of April. I will confirm this. That means that if nothing happens to this pipeline, if there are no disruptions, that our capacity to produce is currently at about 2.5 billion barrels per day. This is very attainable. Engagements are ongoing with the respective security agencies to make sure that we can contain the incidence of bundles and our ability to come back and restore operations.
In 2022, we are projecting 1.88. And in 2023, we are looking at 2.23. A difference of almost 500,000 barrels. What are those things, the expectation that you are looking at that can achieve that set target by 2023 from 1.88 to about 2.23? And secondly, the second one I wanted to clarify is between the Ministry of Finance and the NNPC. In 2021, there are no subsidies. And petroleum pump price per liter is 162. It's sold at 162, and importation is 250. How do we provide for that gap in 2021?
In 2020, we are able to raise our production to 2.49 million barrels per day without any effort. So that means the capacity to produce is there. All we need, if we don't do anything today, we can easily attain the 2.3 by just ensuring security of our assets. And that's why we're very comfortable that projecting 2.3 in 2024 is very, very realistic, because in the sense that we know that the OPEC arrangement has timeline. We'll exit the current arrangement in 2022, and we don't think it will be renewed. And therefore, if it is not renewed, we'll come back to our pre-COVID abilities to produce. And that's why we allowed the 2.3 to stay. Secondly, on subsidy for 2021, for us in the NNPC, we are by law required to provide petroleum, motor spirit or PMS or energy for this country by law. So not doing it is a breach of the law, Mr. Chairman. And therefore, we have an absolute responsibility to do this. And that's why there's this distinction between, they mean the same thing, subsidy and under recovery. for us, we have resources that in our hands that we procure from the Federation, and we should be paid for it. But because we cannot afford it, then we are not able to recover our full cost, and therefore we transfer this cost to the Federation. And therefore, with or without any provision, there's an absolute necessity and responsibility for the NNPC to do this. And that's why we continue to supply PMS into the Nigerian market at sub-market prices, and of course sub-market prices at the pump. And what we have to do is to come back to the National Assembly as a matter of process to make sure that we have probably a post-mortem endorsement of this. That's a process that is going on, but the reality today is that we are not able to recover our full cost. And by law, Mr. Chairman, by law, the law requires that NNPC returns to the Federation the total value of any resources that is in our hands, net of our cost. So ordinarily, we'll say this is okay, but we have been a very transparent company. We are coming back to the National Assembly to present this with the Ministry of Finance. And for 2022, it's very obvious that we made provision. By no means is sufficient. If you look at today's number, it's still low of averages. That if you look at today's prices, obviously the provision that you see in the MTF that you are seeing is not sufficient to cover today's cost. But we also know that the price will normalize. It will come down to a level where the provisions that is made in this document very possible.
In 2021, if you have made this serious effort, petroleum, motor spirits to the Nigerian people, don't you think this idea will affect the distributable income available for distribution among the three tiers of government? If it does, how do you get their support for you to go through this route?
It is spending anyhow we look at it. When we pay below market for the price of commodity that we consume, you are literally spending on behalf of all of us, Mr. Chairman. This is really what is happening. And therefore, the alternative is to sell at market so that those net revenues become available so that we can put it on some other obligations, including building of infrastructure, hospitals, and so on and so forth. The alternative is to do this. Since we are not able to do this at this point in time, then it means that this is actually revenue earned by the Federation, by all of us, and that it is being spent to subsidize our consumption of petroleum motor spirits. So it's actually, in reality, these are real revenues that are real, that we are having, but we can't keep it because we are paying the suppliers of petroleum motor spirit for that cost.
The GMD has informed us that there is a provision for subsidy in 2022. Is that already captured in this year's MTF and budget that is coming before us? By that singular action, what that simply means is that the issue of subsidy is the sole responsibility of the federal government. That's why we are bringing it to the budget. Are you saying it is the federal government portion you are bringing to the budget, while other? Because I want you to clarify this in line with the response given by the GMD of NNPC. It has spent on our behalf for 2021 that covers both the federal, the state, and the local government. Now in 2022, you are providing for subsidy in the budget. Are you saying that the subsidy you are providing for is the sole responsibility of the federal government to cover the subsidy payment? And in 2021, it's a different ballgame. Can you please explain? Honorable Minister for State and Budget and National Plan, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
We have made that provision not in the federal government's budget, but it's a federation account.
Based on the response you just gave now, I was just playing it out in my mind. You said the provision is against the federation account. Now, the first question is, do you have the consent of the state to do this? That's one. Then two, it also, in terms of impact in the federal, the revenues for the year, you see, it still boils down to the same thing, that it will still have significant impact. And it will also mount pressure on the deficit financing.
On the question as to whether we have the consent of the states, yes, I would say so. We do have the consent of the states through the instrument of the National Economic Council. The MTF was presented to them, and it was explained, and we got their buy-in.
Nigerian Customs Service, we have listened to the GMD of NNPC. The Minister of Finance have also given us a position concerning the borrowing, the budget, the MTF document. The revenue of Nigerian Customs is going down. we are not meeting our targets. And we have done everything to support the Nigerian custom. We have reduced the tariff so as to discourage smuggling. We have also passed into law all the necessary acts or laws that the Nigerian custom has put before us, except if there are some selected few remaining. And part of the assurances we are given was that once these laws are put in place, we can be assured that the revenue of Nigerian custom will double. But rather, it is not showing that trend. I don't know, maybe there are other factors mitigating against the possibility of having more revenue from the Nigerian custom that you think we need to assist on from this side of the divide. I want to know if this year's projection we are looking at is achievable in line with what we have achieved so far in 2021.
My question is only one, and that is, why are we having problem meeting our target? And despite the fact that the National Assembly has put in everything that is necessary to get us moving and collecting the targeted revenue. Mr. Chairman, let me start by saying, unlike my brother in the NNPC, the job of customs is unpredictable. We rely on the market forces that drives the import of items into Nigeria. And as of today, Mr. Chairman, the bulk of our revenue comes from import. In most climes where the customs collect revenue, they rely mostly on excise. And that means the production within the country. Today in Nigeria, as you know very well, Mr. Chairman, the only excise we are authorized to collect is on tobacco and alcoholic beverages. All other industries that produces in Nigeria do not pay excise. And therefore, we narrowed ourselves to that unpredictable ground where we don't have any control as regards the influx of import. And therefore, we are therefore vulnerable to the fact that we can only act with what has been imported. And 2021, we are in fact grateful to God that in 2020, despite the COVID-19, we realized an upgrade with regards to the revenue. And as then, we were able to garner total collection of about 1.5 trillion. And as of today, Mr. Chairman, in the first 6 months of this year 2021, we were able to make 1.02 trillion. So it then means that we are realizing steady growth in terms of total collection of our revenue. And it is our belief, Mr. Chairman, that if the trajectory continues at this level, then the chances are that we will be collecting at the end of the year an amount to about 2 trillion or 2 trillion plus. That is attributed to the fact that as COVID is subsiding, the market is opening, people are importing. But we do not, and I want to say this, looking far to the future, the issue of import should not be the basis of our revenue collection. We must encourage our own production within the country and therefore expand our excise base. Today we have sung this song several times, that we are supposed to be collecting excise on carbonated drinks. The issue, the policy of government is to reduce the consumption of items that are injurious to our health. And that is why alcoholic beverages are being taxed, and we are collecting excise. Tobacco, we are collecting. Today, Coca-Cola is produced in Nigeria and paying no excise. It's only in Nigeria that you find Coca-Cola products and they're not paying excise duty. All other carbonated drinks are also injurious to our health. So if we equally tax tobacco and alcoholic beverages, I see no reason why we should not tax the carbonated drinks. We have said this for the past 5 years I've been on this seat. And up to today, we have not been able to get it through. Why? The reason why, I don't know. So, Mr. Chairman, my submission is simple. We will continue to rely on the unpredictable atmosphere to collect as much as we can, but for us to be precise and more predictable, I think we must pay more attention to our industries and extract excise from them. That will be more predictable and much more realizable. And of course, for every import duty we collect, we are, as a matter of fact, encouraging other countries to produce. For every import that comes into our country, it is our money that goes out to finance those factories and give jobs to their own people. Whereas in our case, we are not producing. So, Mr. Chairman, to say this is that the National Assembly should also help and see how, on the whole, totality of it, we can encourage domestic production, because that is the only way we can sustain our economy and, of course, sustain the revenue collection for the Nigerian Customs Service.
On the issue of smuggling across border, what are those things that the Nigerian Customs have put in place to stem the tides of smuggling? 2, expansion of scope of business. I am fully aware that there are attempts to install scanners in our various ports across the country. What is the situation with that aspect of scope of work of the Nigerian Customs in trying to install scanners? 3, underpayment of custom duties on imported goods. I'm saying this from the point of fact that the so-called loss in revenue, how are we sure that what was reported by the Nigerian Customs is the actual amount realized vis-a-vis the internal control measure put in place at our various borders and ports to ensure that if anybody brings in any contraband goods and who is ready to pay, actually pays that money as against underpaying the federal government. I want you to speak to all these issues in line with the revenue reported so far by the Nigerian Customs.
Issue of smuggling across the border. This is one of the biggest challenges Nigerian Customs has, and I don't think it's only Nigerian Customs Service, it's the global problem to all customs administrations. Even the most advanced customs administrations suffer the calamities of smuggling because of the penchant of our people to move across items that are either on prohibition list or those that would attract the duty, but for some reason they evade the duty. So this is not only our problem, but it's a global problem. And in Nigeria, ours is even the worst because our people are the most non-compliant group of people. I must say this and say it with all sense of responsibility. If we measure in terms of compliance, our people are not ready to comply. And therefore, you find out that for every 10 container that we examine, you hardly find 5, in most cases, that are fully in line with declaration. The rest are either under-declared, in connivance between the importers, the freight forwarders, and of course our officers in some cases. So this is one of the fundamental reasons why smuggling still continue to strike. Along our borders, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members, we have put in place what we feel is adequate in terms of managing smuggling. We have a 3-layer enforcement. We have the area commands that are deployed in the borders. We have the federal operation units, and we have the strike force, which are always on standby for any credible information to strike. This have yielded adequate result, but certainly that has not curbed smuggling. And I must say here, Mr. Chairman, that for us to stop smuggling completely is probably unheard of. But we are working assiduously to reduce it to the barest minimum. And we need a lot of other input in terms of technology, in terms of manpower, and of course, most importantly, Mr. Chairman, is that I've said this in so many forums, and I will repeat it here, is that the non-cooperation of our border citizens is one of our biggest problems. And I don't blame them, because when you go to these border communities, Mr. Chairman, you find out that in most cases, there's no governance, there's no presence of government there. They don't have water. Some of them have to cross to the other countries to be able to get medical attention. And so when we contact them and begin to talk to them for cooperation, they looked at us with some strange face, because they don't understand why they should cooperate with us. And it's true, because we don't provide anything to them. We have border management committee, nothing is happening. We have made cases and complaints, nothing is happening. And these people, in most cases, are the ones that turn around to support smugglers to fight us. In a nutshell, it must be, all hands must be on deck for us to be able to reduce smuggling at the border. What that means, the communities living along our borders must be brought into this government. They must see the reason why they should support government agencies in fighting smuggling. Because in most cases, the smugglers have money, they give them job, because yes, they employ them to go and move rice or whatever it is across the border, and they pay them. That's their employment. And you are now saying they should not support those people. It's almost impossible. So we need to do something. And I hope the National Assembly would come up with something that is credible for us to work on. And I'm challenging the National Assembly to also work out something that will help us fight. It's a way of life for some people. People live on it. It's very true. I will not say no to you. Some people live on it. And the only way we can do is to get them out of that. And in our case, as Nigerian Customs Service, we are doing this corporate social responsibility, build clinics, allow them to have access, build sink boreholes for them, but that we don't have the money to take care of the border community people. We cannot do that. It's not our job. But we are doing that in order to elicit cooperation from them. But that's the little we can do to get the cooperation. But the overall responsibility is that of government, to take care of one's citizens and ensure that they see the reason why they should be Nigerians and should also protect the laws of Nigeria. Next is the issue of scanners. The issue of scanners, we have been working on scanners for a very long time. We had scanners before due to some lack of proper maintenance and also schedule and politics, those scanners eventually collapsed. But in the past 3 years, we have been working with Ministry of Finance and gladly finally secured 3 mobile scanners which would be deployed in the next couple of weeks. They are on the high sea as of today, and by estimation, we are expecting the 2 scanners coming to Apapa and Tinkan Island to arrive in the first week of September. That's between the 6th and 7th of September, if all things work out well. So those scanners will be deployed in Tinkan Island and Apapa Port. Then the 3rd one will be deployed at One Port, which are the 3 major ports that we operate from. And this will help us in no small measure in making sure that every container that comes into this country will be scanned. As of today, our problem is that when somebody brings in 10, 20, 50 containers, they hardly can you examine 5 at a time. And in most of these 10, 50, 20 containers, you find out that there's hardly 5 of them that are aligned to the declaration. Most of them are either more falsified or underdeclared or misclassification. So there are a lot of these issues that needs to be. But our hope and aspiration is that as we deploy these 3 scanners at the major ports, we will reduce to the barest minimum the chances. Of course, yes, because then when you know exactly what the item is, then the declaration you will not allow that underpayment SGD to pass. So that will give us the essence to know exactly every container what it contains. And when you make false declaration, then we'll have the reason to catch you up with that. And that will reduce to the barest minimum the falsification. What we are dealing with is 2 things. That's 100% examination. 100% examination means bringing out a 40-feet container, removing everything in it to see what is there. And you can't do that. You can't inspect 5 containers in a day if you do that. But if you have a scanner, you can run down 200, 300 at a go. And all you need to do is store the reason, and the analyst will do the analysis and they tell you what it contains. And most of these are the high definition scanners. There's nothing that they cannot pick up as long as it's in that container. So our hope is that when we deploy this, we'll be able to reduce to the various minimum. And of course, with the chairman, you also know that we are working on the e-custom. The e-custom is going to provide us with 135 scanners, which will be deployed along our land borders, sea shores, and also airports. And that by the time we finish this, then we can be rest assured that we'll have 100% examination of every item that passes through our approved ports, including, with due respect, ladies' handbags. Because in those bags, one small bag can carry a diamond that is worth millions of naira. And now, one of our biggest problems, because we don't have the scanners, if you tell a lady, open your bag, it's like you are invading into our own privacy. But with the scanner, all we say is push it through the scanner, and then the scanner will tell us what it contains. And with that, we'll be able to pick up some of these revenue leakages that are happening. Then, Mr. Chairman, that dovetails into issue of the underpayment. Underpayment comes as a result of falsification of entries. And as long as we have scanners and we are sure of what you are bringing, there's no way you can underdeclare. And if you cannot underdeclare, you cannot underpay. So our hope is that scanners, as we go along, will be one of our most important technology that will reduce to the barest minimum the essence of smuggling that goes through our approved ports. Again, there are smugglers that go through other routes. And those ones, we have to come up with measures jointly to fight those ones.
I think that we should be careful about the way we are pushing the issue of the excise duty relating to carbonated drinks. And I explained, it's a catch-22. You see, we're at a stage where the industries in the country are struggling. Now, equally, disposable income too is at almost a very low ebb right now. Now, you don't want to create a situation where people's ability to produce is kind of reduced. And at the same time, I'm mindful of the health consciousness that you are bringing about. But please note that the people who drink this thing the most are younger people, and they still have the energy to burn out these things. You understand? So the older people that are drinking, perhaps they should be guided, rather than, bringing about a punitive thing that will slow down production. So I just want us to be careful. It might not be the right time to do this.
The younger people are catching diabetes too. And it's as a result of high consumption of sugar. And for a bottle of Coke, if you get the statistics, and if I'm right, minimum sugar is 6 cues of sugar in that bottle, one bottle. In that one bottle. And if you allow people to continue to take that because they have energy to burn it, it will begin to accumulate, and it gets to a point whereby, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have also spoken to the medical doctors. It will accumulate to a point that it will now become a disease to that person. So while we are looking at the health sector also, Mr. Chairman, we must also look at the economic sector. Is there anywhere in this country, I stand to be corrected, is there anywhere that Coca-Cola produces and not paid excise? Coca-Cola produces virtually all our bottled drinks in this country, from Sprite to everything, and they pay nothing. In Benin here, if you know how much they pay, there's nowhere in the world that they don't pay. So let's not look at these small industries as this thing. We can do exemption when it comes to this, but in actual sense, the distinguished chairman, I think it is time for us to charge duty on carbonated drinks. We shouldn't shy away. This is why sometimes I have problems, Mr. Chairman. We, the revenue generation organizations, are not forced to keep saying, bring revenue, bring revenue. When we now come up with ideas of how we will garner those revenues, say, no. We can't tax this. We will not tax this. We will not. So where do we get the money from?
The CG, if you have any of such proposal, the finance bill is on its way. Speak to the team. They are looking into this bill, so that you can come up with your own proposal to be included, to be part of the document that will be submitted to us while we are awaiting the president to bring the document before us. Now, I don't want to go into the issue of carbonated drink. I have an information on that, but let me step that aside. Central Bank, I was told your submission is not here. And I believe that you are part and parcel of this. You are even part of the bedrock upon which this MTF is predicated upon because of the exchange rates. And we have the belief that the recent happenings in the exchange rates is not too good a news for us as a country and as a nation. I want you to speak to the following. 1, dual exchange rates. The rates we are using for the budget is different from the rates we are exchanging dollars. 2, proscription of the BDC. 3, sales of forex by the banks. And I want you to look at that from the angle that are we not empowering the MDs of these banks? I'm being specific. I'm not going to the banks, the MDs of these banks, in terms of having this forex, and they now determine how this forex is allocated or goes to who, if not their own cronies. 4, how will you view us as a country in the light of this inconsistency in exchange rates?
You talked about dual exchange rate. I'd like to mention clearly that the CBN only recognizes the NFX market as the operational market for exchange rate dealings in the country. I do realize that there might be others, but the tail cannot wag the dog. So the BDC segment actually does about 6% of FX transactions in the country, whereas the NFX market settles over 90%. So if you take an average, you can tell that you cannot allow the tail to wag the dog. So we do just recognize the NFX rate. And keep in mind,
DG, what is the rate that is used for this year's budget?
410, I would have started by saying that that was our advice as well.
410.
Yes.
What's this rate? I think it's 412. But for 2022, 410 point. What is the rate that the bank is selling dollar for potential users as of today?
It's about the same rate, sir.
It's about, you are not sure?
I am sure, but you have to keep in mind that it's not a fixed rate. If we are practicing a fixed exchange rate, say like Dubai, it's the same. But on a daily basis, remember that this is influenced by demand and supply. So sometimes it can move just by a little bit.
And that is dual exchange rate?
It's not dual, sir. That's not dual exchange rate. So if
today, I'm coming, sir, this budget is predicated, and that is what the mindset is about. That's how government is going to spend for the whole year, using that rate. And I go to the same bank that you have now put official to buy this dollar, and they are ready to sell it for me for 420. Are you saying as a result of demand and supply? That not contravene what we pass as law? I just want you to clarify.
No, sir. Rates that goes into the budget is not a transaction rate, it's a planning rate. So this is the rate by which we monetize FX that comes from the 3 main sources and put it into local currency. So it's not really a transaction rate. The DG budget can confirm that. DG DMO is there too. It's a planning rate. So there's no dual rate. And remember that only God knows tomorrow. You put in the rate and then you see what happens from time to time. But at least you have to have a rate by which you plan and get revenues monetized into local currency. You talked about BDC rates, sir, or rather proscription of BDCs. So we realized that BDCs themselves were created to serve only small end users, people who want $5,000 or less. That was why BDCs were created, and that was why we empowered them. But over time, we found that they've sort of abandoned that calling and gone into other things. Of course, you heard the CG custom describe us as difficult people. So we began to see that, and we felt that it is easier and better and faster to target banks that have 25 billion in capital than BDCs that some don't even have shops. So we thought that it is better if we saw that we're giving about $400 million a month to BDCs. And it was not clear what exactly this money was being used for. So we thought that if you channel that money to banks, at least if there's an offense, you picked out the MDs. They know they can lose something more important than playing around with tens of dollars. And we are looking at it very carefully since we stopped giving monies to BDCs and turned to the banks. And they know that the penalties will be very stiff. So that's exactly what we have done. So that money is now there. I doubt if, of course, there will be exceptions, but a lot of people that have approached the banks since we started this will confirm that they have been getting their monies a lot more. I'm not saying everyone.
okay, that FX is available out there because we've prescribed BDC. I don't want to agree with that, okay? But again, I don't think this is the place for us to go into detailed argument on these issues. But what I want to say is that, you know, we have a major problem in this country. You come up with abrupt policies that tend to negate what you actually want to achieve, okay? Prescribing BDC the way you did, to me, was not the right way to go. If you observe lapses in their operations, what you need to do is to institute various corrective measures, okay? And when those measures are not adhered to, you can now go into outright proscription. That is the way it should go, whether you like it or not. Some of these BDCs have been there for a very long time. They've invested monies too in various structures. And overnight, you just came up with the policy measure and said, you have been proscribed. To me, that is not right. They are Nigerians. And that in itself is a source of business.
What the distinguished senator said is correct to the extent that the first action we took was not the action that we announced. There's been several measures. We work with these people. I mean, you give us benefit of that we know them better than most. And we have tried every means possible to also just mention that they are not proscribed, so let's not allow that lexicon go into the media. All we have said is, you told us you know how to sell Forex, source it by yourself. Don't come to the common pool of every Nigerian to get the same money you said you are an expert in. So they are not proscribed, they are still doing their business, they can get effect from autonomous sources and sell as they wish, but they are not proscribed, sir.
I'm going to tell this committee how we are fared under the independent revenue, what are the issues that have been confronting us in trying to get this revenue to the coffers of the government. This committee has embarked on an investigative hearing since March of this year, and a lot of revelations that are not too palatable has been unfolding. And I know in your kitty currently is 60 GOEs, government-owned enterprises, which we hope that this 2022 year's budget, you should grow it to as much as 120 of these government-owned agencies. Part of what this tends to achieve is that a lot of issues related to the Fiscal Responsibility Act has been raised. And this idea of trying to set the act aside and use an internal memo, executive order to override an act of the National Assembly will not be tenable to us. So we're all here now with some of these agencies to hear from you and by extension hear from them what has been the real issue. While you pondering on that, I'll come back to the DMO's office. DMO, before us again is the MTF, the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework. The government of the day has made projection, and borrowing is part of it. Public outcry, we are borrowing so much. We are borrowing so much. And the repayment plan, even though we have been meeting our obligation in paying back, we are paying so much back. What are the real issues? I want you to speak to the borrowing plan of the government vis-a-vis the medium-term expenditure framework that we have before us. And what are those challenges that we have regarding this borrowing and its planning?
We've tried to do a short, very brief presentation that addresses the borrowing by government in general, the increase in borrowing, and then we talked about what effect that would have on the debt to GDP, as well as the debt service to revenue ratios. We've highlighted those, and then we have some recommendations. We start by saying that borrowing was high when Nigeria went into the first recession, and it was based on the economic growth and recovery plan. We understood that we needed to bring the economy out of recession. But gradually, the level of borrowing started coming down. Not significantly, but at least there was a tendency towards that. But last year, when the budget was revised because of the social and economic implications of COVID-19, the borrowing shot up, I think, about double. So we were working on a new borrowing, domestic and external, of about 1.6, and suddenly it went up to about 4.6. Okay, so that was a good trend. We could say that we were making an effort and that revenues had become the focus, because our position is that medium to long term, we can't, or rather, it's not advisable to fund the government through borrowing. It has to be through revenues. That is what is sustainable. Then borrowing can be for special purposes. So in the presentation we put here, we put basically extracted the new borrowings from the budget. And as the distinguished chairman said, it is high. So we're continuing with that trajectory of 4.6 of last year. This year as well, the same range, and it gets up to 5.356 trillion in 2024. So it is actually growing. So as debt managers are concerned is, do we see that same trajectory in the revenues? We've also provided some figures on debt service. So what we usually say, one of the things we say, and we've been saying for many years, is that debt to GDP is low. That is true, but the requirement is that the GDP should generate revenues from the various activities that result in that gross domestic product, should generate revenues to service the debt. So if we look at the data of some other countries, we will see their debt to GDP is much higher than that of Nigeria. We were at 21.61 as at December 2020 rather. The figure is there in one of the tables. But we find that countries like the US and the UK have much higher ratios, in some cases 80%. But when you get to their debt service to revenue ratio, you will see 10%, at most 15%. So it means the numbers are not adding up here in terms of revenue. So the issue, the recommendation from us really is that we should begin to focus on revenue. We recently, under the new medium-term debt management strategy, we increased the debt to GDP limit to 40%. That's because of all of this increasing borrowing, as well as the promissory notes that are being approved and all of that. But it doesn't really mean we should get to that 40% if we haven't made significant improvements in revenue. Okay, so as the Honorable Minister was presenting, he did say that January to June, the debt service to revenue was about 34%. What we typically see is that that gets exceeded, and from some of the numbers that are published periodically, 50%, and it exceeds that. So that's not good for any country. So when we say there's a revenue problem, there is a revenue problem. So in our opinion, the borrowing is high, but what we then need to do is accelerate revenues significantly to be able to service the debt. So why is the debt stock growing? It's growing because of these figures. Part of what we say at the DMO is, in each budget, as we have a borrowing figure, by end of the year, the public debt grows by that amount or more, because there's also another route for borrowing through the medium-term external borrowing plan that comes to the National Assembly. So that's why the debt stock is growing, and those are duly approved as provided for in the DMO Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So what is our recommendation, sir? Our first recommendation is that we must do a lot more about revenue. What would increased revenue do for us? It reduces the level of new borrowing required, but it also reduces the debt service to revenue ratio. The other point we are saying is if we continue where in some quarters we have debt service at about 80% of revenues, there's a problem. We don't want to get to a situation where debt becomes unsustainable. So we're appealing that we begin to focus on revenues. The other point we have made here, the recommendation we have made here is really that is if we're looking at these borrowings as the borrowings in the budget as a source of financing, except for last year, 2020, when it was COVID and we got loans from like the IMF and other multilateral organizations, these borrowings in the budget typically come from the financial markets, whether local or international. So those are commercial rates. Those are business people, the investors. It will come at high rates and it will show in the debt service. So our recommendation really is that besides increasing revenue, we think when we kindly appeal that it be considered in a process like this, which are our priority projects? How can we achieve a reduction in new borrowing by spending that new borrowing on priority projects that are critical for growth and development? The third part we are saying here is we do recognize, obviously we are also here living in Nigeria, and we see other countries like Benin and Ghana that the CG Customs talked about. The reality is that we don't have the capacity to keep borrowing if revenues are not growing. So we're saying let's begin to look at public-private partnerships in whatever form. We have some existing assets that can be concessioned, but really when we have projects, let's look at them from the perspective of public-private partnership. Let's begin to get some of those projects to generate revenues. So we were actually happy to see that there's now a tolling policy on roads. We need to do that. We don't have the capacity. We have a need to improve infrastructure, but borrowing like this for all these years without growing revenues will give us a challenge. So we want to recommend, and we agree, and I believe that's the point this committee has been making, and we've also had the President of the Senate make a statement to that effect. Let's grow revenues. If we want to borrow to develop the economy, let's keep a sharper focus from the position we are now on revenues so that we don't spend all our revenues on debt service or even borrow to service debt.
Well, it's with that package that will round off today's edition of the program from the National Assembly. I'm Ignatius Nkwo. Enjoy the rest of our programs.